You're listening to the Today's Wills and Probate podcast, one of the leading sources of information for the wills and probate sector. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todayswillsandprobate.co.uk and follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello, welcome along to the latest Today's Wills and Probate podcast. Today I'm talking about later life admin, probably. This is Alison Hesketh, Managing Director and founder of TimeFinders. You're going to tell me an awful lot more about what TimeFinders is, Alison. But the conversation today is about your services, which helps people in later life deal with a whole range of administrative challenges, sometimes some emotional challenges, that kind of thing. It's great to have you on the podcast. Thanks very much indeed for joining.
Thank you.
I probably haven't done TimeFinders justice. So in your own words, you tell me, who are you and what do you do?
TimeFinders was set up in 2010, really concentrating on retirement downsizing, which we found was an area that wasn't being covered really by anybody else at that time. But as we've grown, as our clients have grown, we've realised that there was this yawning gap between the legal and financial professions and the care sector. And an awful lot of people were falling into that gulf. So there was very little about care options, about contingency planning, about really looking carefully at whether people were living in the right place at the right time, what support did they need. And we found that people were coming to these questions really for the first time in their lives, and they had nowhere to go, nowhere to find the information. And that's where our service then began to grow, bridging that gap and then providing that very practical help, but also the emotional support that goes with it as people are facing changing circumstances and challenging circumstances.
And I remember you saying to me that like so many businesses, it was kind of born out of your own frustrations and your own experiences.
Yes, it was. I suppose about 10 years previously, I'd helped my mother downsize. She was in good health, but getting a little frail, and realised that she wasn't living in the right place. So I would bung the children in the car and drive 2 hours up the motorway and cram into busy weekends, something that should have been a very gentle process. And we got on with it marvelously, but we both said, look, this is crazy. There must be some service that can help us. And we looked around at that time, couldn't find anything, so we got on with what we were doing. And I thought absolutely nothing more about it until I took a break. I was a charity troubleshooter, so I would be kind of pitched into charities in crisis, stay anything between sort of 3 months and 2 years as their acting CEO, get them sorted out and recruit somebody else. And I took a break from that in my mother's final illness. After she died, I thought, don't want to go back to the voluntary service. I was wondering what on earth to do. And then a very good friend who got to know my mother came to me and said, look, much as I love my mother, if I have to spend more than half an hour in her company helping her sort out her stuff, I think I'm probably going to scream. Is there anything you can do? And I thought, yes, there probably is. And that's how TimeFinders was born.
And so if it started out as a service whereby you were looking at helping people find the right place at the right time, which I think is a lovely phrase, how has that developed? What sort of services are you offering now? I mean, I'm thinking about a huge number of financial support incentives for people and lots of opportunity for people in later life to get financial support, but they don't always know about it. We did a podcast a few months ago about attendance allowance, and that is a complete black hole in terms of people's understanding and knowledge of it. Carers allowance, it was in the budget just a few weeks ago. How's your service developed in line with some of those opportunities?
You're absolutely right. People don't know about these things, and attendance allowance in particular, they don't know, which is not means tested and it's not taxed, I don't think, and it's available to anybody who needs a little bit of extra support. It's not just about benefits, it's about people don't want to think about later life. I suppose one of the things that gets me really quite angry is all these sort of lovely flowery adverts for equity release saying you can stay in your own home and you can give lots of money and get your children onto the housing ladder, and you can enjoy the retirement lifestyle that you really want. And they're looking at young people, relatively young retirees, who are not thinking ahead, not thinking that they might need help and support, not thinking that their home may be totally unsuitable for them to stay in as they get older. They're not thinking about the fact that if they're in a couple, inevitably one of them is going to be left on their own. Our service helps people in a very safe space think about those really difficult questions. What happens if you can't drive anymore? What happens if you shouldn't be driving anymore? What happens if you can't get upstairs and you don't have a downstairs cloakroom? Can your house be adapted? These questions are things that people don't want to think about. But what we found is that when we guide them through that process, every single time clients have said, wow, I feel so much better now, because that's been a worry, a dark worry in the back of my mind, but I haven't known what to do about it. And now I feel I've made some decisions so that if there's a crisis, I know what's going to happen. It allows people to stop worrying about it and live their life that they're living right now, knowing that they've made those important decisions for later life. So working, the best way is for us to work hand in hand with their financial advisor. It's to work hand in hand with their solicitor to make sure that they've got their wills up to date, that they've got their powers of attorney. And again, many people don't understand about powers of attorney and how important they are. I suppose that brings me on to what we've done for people who are aging alone. They are a large proportion of the population, but they are very rarely considered. For example, I was at a dementia care summit the other day, and it was all about dementia and its effects on the family. There was nothing about what happens if you develop dementia and you're on your own, and many people are going to be in that position.
There's probably some listeners here who've got a lot of empathy with what you're saying, because this is a conversation that people simply don't want to have. Only 60% of the population have got a will. They don't want to have this conversation. They don't want to think about what might happen.
But when they do, and when they know that they've got a contingency plan, it provides a most amazing peace of mind. Working with people who are aging alone, that's a really, really scary thought. One of the reasons why we started the advocacy service is because a client had looked after her mother, who was in her 90s, done all the things that family members do, take to appointments, chase this, make sure benefits are received, make sure the shopping is done. And after her mother died, there was this sudden awful realization that she didn't have anybody who could do that for her. And as she said, I don't want to be the old lady screaming in the corner because there's nobody looking out for me.
We've touched on the advocacy service. So tell me about that. How does that work? What's the real benefit for clients with that particular service?
There are two benefits. The first is for clients who are aging alone, who don't have anybody to appoint as a health and welfare attorney, lasting power of attorney. And solicitors listening today will know that they may have people coming into their offices saying, well, we'd really love you to be our attorney. And the solicitor will say, well, yes, of course, I can be your financial attorney, because the financial attorneyship can be held by an agency, a corporate body. So it's not Joe Blogg's solicitor as the attorney, it's Joe Blogg's of XYZ solicitors who hold the attorney on their client's behalf. You can't do that with a health and welfare attorney. It has to be a named individual. I've come across one firm of solicitors who do take on health and welfare attorneys, but when I spoke to them, they really rather regretted doing it. The skills needed is really outside the legal remit. It's not part of their general experience, and it takes up a huge amount of time. In response to the lady who'd looked after her mother, she'd asked us if we could be a health and welfare attorney, and we thought about it very carefully, because although it was within our remit, it was within our experience, we still had the problem with succession. So we developed the advocacy service, which obviously doesn't have the same legal powers as a health and welfare attorney, but we work with our clients to understand every single thing that we can possibly think of about them, including the really important things like treatment, end of life decisions, down to what sort of deodorant they wear, all sorts of really intimate information. We have assigned and independently witnessed authority from our client to act on their behalf if they are unable to make their own decisions known. And we carry that authorization with us. And if there is an emergency, we drop everything and go running to the hospital or to the house, wherever. Although we carry this authority, we're very rarely asked to produce it, which scares the willies out of me because we could be anybody. But paramedics, social services, health professionals are very, very happy that we are there to help this person who doesn't have any family. We also work with people who do have a health and welfare attorney, and we obviously create a relationship with that person as well. So, for example, we're working with a gentleman in London. His health and welfare and financial attorney is his sister. They're very close, except she lives in Australia. Technically, if you like, she can make the decisions, has the power to make the decisions as attorney, but there's no way that she can affect those decisions because she's thousands of miles away. So she knows that she can rely on us to put those decisions into action, and between us we can make sure that this gentleman is supported.
It kind of brings me on to something you touched on there in terms of some of the skills that might be required to do this kind of role. Where do you recruit people from for this sort of service, and what kind of skills do you expect them to have? I mean, presumably there's a lot of soft skills in this as well.
I would say that 90% of it is soft skills, if not more. You've got to be empathetic. You've got to be objective. You've got to be a creative problem solver. You've got to have that fine division between being organised but not being bossy. Our whole role is to empower our clients to be as independent and as in control as possible, no matter what their stage of health. And that includes people who are living with dementia, because so many people who do have that condition find themselves wrapped up in cotton wool for the best reasons, because people love them and want to keep them safe, but actually it's stifling and it's suffocating. To empower them to do the things that they can do safely is a really important part of the job. We can't teach those skills. You've got to have them. They're not skills, they're qualities, really. What we can teach is how to be an advocate, how to go about downsizing, how to do the continuing support, how to do the future planning with somebody. That we can teach, and we have a mixture of on-site training in the office, but a lot of our training is through observation and mentoring. Our consultants will come with one of our senior people, see how we work with a client, then they'll do that, but we'll have the senior person in the background, observing them with that constructive sort of criticism of what they're doing. And people come from a range of backgrounds: special educational needs teachers, music teachers, social prescribers, burnt out social workers who are desperate to do a better job for their clients, but the workload is killing them. People from nursing backgrounds, not so many people from actual caring backgrounds, but senior care managers. You've got to have a degree of authority to be able to work with people who think they know the right thing to do, but you might differ from that because you're representing your client's views.
Is it fair to say that there's an element of life experience here then that's needed, that perhaps this is a second career for people?
I think it works very well. We did have a very young consultant in her 20s who had thought about training for the law, but she brought a lot of life experience with her. She had travelled a lot. She had elderly relatives that she'd been responsible for. She was a volunteer in her local community, helping people with homelessness. So it's not just an age thing, but I think, well, I'm sure any HR person would probably slap me over the wrists, but yes, as you say, a second career, because it is part-time. Generally speaking, our consultants are part-time, and because it is flexible in that you can arrange your appointments with your clients, it does suit people who have some caring responsibilities, whether that's for elderly parents or whether it's for children.
We've talked about this before we started the recording, but if we can describe who you deal with as a target market, if that's not too appalling a phrase to consider, who are you trying to address then through your activity? Do you typically talk to your ultimate clients? Do you talk to family members, for example? Because I love that story about your friend who, loved her mum, but found 30 minutes in her company quite challenging. I think there are people that can probably relate to that.
It divides really neatly into three. Some older clients come to us directly, and they come to us because we've done Dementia Friends information sessions, we've done talks on contingency planning, whatever. A lot of families come to us saying, what on earth do I do about mum? Many people come because there's been a crisis and we get calls saying he's in hospital and they say he's got to move into care, and we can start unpicking that and giving people the options that residential care isn't the only option. But we also work a lot with private client solicitors who recognise that insidious mission creep that comes when you've been working with a valued client for a number of years, and more they're coming to you because they need something that's just outside your legal remit. They're needing that help with a little bit of extra support at home or whatever. And when they find out about our service, we get a lot of referrals from people who recommend us to be advocates for their clients, also to provide a continuing support service. So for clients that have already developed dementia who might already be in a residential care setting, the solicitor is acting as financial attorney, but they want to know that their client is receiving the best care, and they want to know that they're living the best possible life. No matter how wonderful the care home is, you can't expect them to give that one-to-one support that a family member would give had that person have a family. And sometimes helping people who do have family, who either live a long way away or who sadly don't care that much. Once they're in care, that's it. So we're asked to keep an eye on care, to keep an eye on the quality of care, to make recommendations for things that will improve that person's quality of life. And we also do the annual health and welfare reports that professional deputies are required to do.
You've touched on a point there that I want to drill into around the relationship that families have. And, families are complicated, aren't they? How do you deal with scenarios where there is potentially some evidence of coercive control or potentially some sort of abuse of some description? That must be quite challenging.
It is extremely challenging. I think those are the hardest cases that we have to deal with, and quite often those are cases that solicitors ask us to investigate where they have concerns, or perhaps a family member has come to them with a concern. What we do is focus entirely on the older person. They are our client. Doesn't matter who's paying the bill. They are our client. It's their best interest that we are acting for. Sometimes we have to be that independent voice of reason. We have to tell it as it is, and we have to explain to family members who may be attorneys who may not really understand what being an attorney is all about, a financial attorney. Financial abuse through powers of attorney are increasing. There was a very interesting talk from the organisation that used to be called Action on Elder Abuse, and I can't quite remember its new Hourglass, I think it's called now, but they do a lot of research, and it's the casual abuses that people don't recognise as theft. Take your mum's bank card and PIN number and you do her shopping for her. And whilst you're doing the shopping, you think, oh, I'm a bit tired. I think I'll have a nice bottle of wine tonight. So you add it to her shopping. That's actually theft, but people don't recognise it as theft. What we do find is that some domiciliary care companies are still allowing their carers to use their clients' bank card and PIN number. That makes me so angry, because the potential for abuse is enormous, but also it doesn't protect the domiciliary care worker themselves. They are open to accusations of theft when they might be entirely innocent. So it works both ways, but it's something that I really wish the CQC, don't get me started, would actually crack down on.
It sounds as though that's a conversation for another time. The issue of regulation is very, very familiar to the wills and probate community. So not one that we're going to spend a huge amount of time dwelling on. But as we move towards the end of this podcast, let me ask you how you see a service like TimeFinders developing in years to come. And I'm thinking quite specifically about this huge issue with social care, the impending great wealth transfer, which is about the transfer of wealth from the baby boomer generation to their descendants. Blended families, lonely living, you've already touched on that. This void that you've described is going to develop into a chasm, isn't it, in years to come?
Yes, it is. And it's disappointing that governments of all flavours have kicked this can down the road for 20 odd years. I mean, the Dilnut report was produced, I think, this first year that TimeFinders was established. There are two things. One, I do not believe that the transfer of wealth will be from the baby boomer generation to the next generation. What COVID showed the general public, I hope, more than anything else, was that the care sector is not a national service. It is not like the NHS. It is run by private providers. And those private providers range from charities to small businesses to the great big corporations that are kind of managed by the hedge funds and the venture capitalists. So you've got this range of doing it for the good of one's soul, if you like, to doing it for the bottom line. The big care home groups are there about the bottom line. Sorry, the big care home groups, but we have to say how it is. The care that they're providing can be brilliant. It costs a great deal of money. And so the baby boomer generation are going to spend that money largely on delivering profits to people possibly outside this country. There isn't going to be that wealth transfer. They are going to be using the equity in their homes, selling their homes to pay for their care. Their children are not going to be getting their inheritances that they think they're going to be getting. That's all lovely doom and gloom, isn't it? The bald fact is if you've got money, you will be able to get social care of some sort. If you don't have money, your position is very, very difficult. And we have to do something. I don't quite know what, but we have to do something to make sure that the most vulnerable people in our society are protected. My personal view is that for a wide variety of reasons, we'll probably come back to that in a few months' time, but I think there should be a national care college, a rural care college, in the same way that we have a Royal College of Nursing, that individual carers are registered, that there is a career progression for them, so the status of caring is lifted, that there is a national training path, because there are various issues about training that would take me far too long to go into. And because there is a career progression and because it is professionalised, it means that there are sanctions against those people who don't do a good job or who are fraudulent. And there are, as with everything, a few bad apples in the cart. I also suspect that we should take social care funding away from local authorities and have a far more integrated sector than we have at the moment. You can't separate out social care from healthcare. Carers now are doing in the community what district nurses used to do 20, 25 years ago. There's another big push to get healthcare into the community. We'll have to see if the money follows that.
I've not heard that take on what's coming down the track, and I think it's a fascinating kind of view, but we are out of time. Probably the topic of another podcast, no doubt, but it's been great to have you on the discussion, Alison. Thanks so much for sharing the TimeFinders information. Thanks also for sharing your thoughts on sort of what's happening in and around the sector as well. It's been great to have you.
It's been wonderful. Thanks, David. I've really enjoyed it.
The Today's Wills and Probate podcast is available on preferred podcast provider. It's also available on today'swillsandprobate.co.uk. My thanks to Alison. Thank you as ever for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
You're listening to the Today's Wills and Probate podcast, one of the leading sources of information for the wills and probate sector. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at today'swillsandprobate.co.uk and follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.